Hey, what's up? Chris Seiter here, founder of Ex-Boyfriend Recovery and Ex-Girlfriend Recovery. Today we're going to be talking about what to do if your ex wants to be friends with you after a breakup. Now, if you're anything like me and you find yourself in a position where your ex is asking if you could be friends or not, the first thing I would be wondering is, wait, do I even have a chance of getting this person back? Well, if that's you and you're just curious if you even have a chance with your ex, I have good news for you. I've actually put together a quiz that you can take right here, right now, that should take you only about 2 minutes to complete that will actually give you that answer. So if you're interested in taking this quiz, all you have to do is simply look in the description link below this video. Click on that link. It will take you to a page that will ask you a lot of different questions about you and your ex. Then based on how you answer your questions, we're going to run it through an advanced algorithm for you, and it's going to spit out a number or in a phrase or something that will tell you an idea of what kind of chance you have of getting your ex back. So again, if you want to take that quiz, simply look in the description link below this video. All right, now let's begin.
Okay, today we're going to be talking about your ex basically wanting to stay friends with you and if that's a good idea or a bad idea. There's a lot of lines of thinking on this, and I'm going to peel back the layers and hopefully give you some information on how you should approach your situation going forward. Now, I do want to say, let's operate mostly under the assumption that you're trying to get your ex back here. I know sometimes people are a little split on what they should be doing with their situation, but one of the things that I and my team specialize in is what you should do to try to get your ex back, right? So throughout this presentation or throughout this video, I want you to keep that in mind. A lot of what I'm going to be saying is based under the pretense that you are trying to get your ex back. There is some information in there about staying friends with an ex if you're not trying to get them back, but I find the lines kind of blur if you are in this situation. So let's begin. The first thing I really want to talk about is why your ex wants to stay friends with you. And there's a lot of reasonings behind why they want to stay friends with you. And I think the first thing I'd like to talk to you about today is the idea of self-interest. We have this tendency to believe that love makes people selfless, right? We all hear the stories of the mother who's willing to throw herself in front of a car for her child. But people like that are often in the minority. Most people, at least from what I've seen from working with hundreds, maybe even thousands of individuals, is we're all very self-interested, especially when it comes to our love lives. We want to do what's best for ourselves. And this also is something I want you to keep in mind when it comes to being friends with your ex. Your ex wants to be friends with you. Why? Well, they're not wanting to be friends with you because they're selfless and they want to help you out. They want to be friends with you because in some ways your performance benefits them. In my mind, there are 3 ways that being friends with you can benefit them, that it's in their best interest. The first two are actually pretty easy to grasp, right? Number 1 is emotional support. When you go through a breakup, you tend to have a lot of different reactions. Some people jump in bed with the first person they can find. Some people blubber and want to avoid you like the plague. And then some people want to remain friends with you and use you for emotional support. After all, who knows better than what they're going through than you, that person who was in the relationship with them, right? And oftentimes what you will find happen is if you remain friends with them and if you start giving them emotional support, it's pretty one-sided, right? A lot of times they want you to listen to their problems and they're not willing to reciprocate when you start talking about your problems. Friendships are defined by equality. At least that's the way it's supposed to be. This is not that kind of a friendship. It's a one-sided friendship. And sometimes what you'll also find happen is, let's say you do become friends with your ex and you do start providing them that emotional support. I'm sure you guys have experienced some of this before. The lines kind of blur. The emotional support eventually turns to physical support. That's the friends with benefits type of an idea or type of a relationship where you're starting off as just being simple friends, as, listening to your ex's problems. And then one day he or she calls you and things become physical. You end up sleeping together and that's your relationship, right? Then there's a third option. Now, people sometimes get appalled when I say this, but I honestly think it's the truth. When you go through a breakup, it's nothing more than the person that you're with basically stating, I think I can do better than you. On some level, I think you understand that. On some level, your ex understands that. They think they can do better than you, right? They think they can find someone that will meet their needs or whatever they're needing in a relationship better than you. Now, the problem with this is oftentimes when we're in these relationships and things aren't going like we like them to, we have a tendency to fantasize and make these ideas of what other people or what other experiences with people will be like. And then when we actually do start to act on those ideas, we find reality is a lot harder than we thought. We find it's not easy to find someone that is like you. Sometimes the person that they find can't live up to you. Sometimes they go out and they can't get a girlfriend or a boyfriend to save their life. And so where do they turn? They turn right back to you because that is comfortable. And they will remain friends with you. They will try to get emotional support, sometimes try to get physical support, sometimes just keep you in limbo until they can find that next person. And oftentimes the clients I've worked with, this is the situation they're in. They're worried to lose their position. They're worried that they're going to lose their ex forever if they're not friends with them. But oftentimes, if they are friends with them, these are the likely outcomes that kind of happen. Why? Because of self-interest. Right? So let's move on to talk about this other idea. If staying friends with an ex can ever work. It's an interesting question. I think there's three things really I want to touch on here. Sometimes it can work. There's no doubt about it. But I think it only works if you redefine the rules. If you both understand that you both have to be getting something out of this relationship. This can't be one-sided. And I also think more than anything, what it ends up doing is just complicates things for you, right? It's hard to remain friends with an ex, and there's a reason for why that is, because the two of you have shared so much together that a step backwards feels like a failure to both of you on some level. Right? You think you're a little bit above the rules of friendship, and you are. And that's why it's hard to remain friends with an ex. But sometimes it can work. You see people who are divorced all the time that can remain friends after the divorce, but they're not best friends. They're just friends. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. Now, in most cases, it's not going to work. And why? It's pretty simple. It complicates things. It's hard to be friends with an ex when you can think about all of the things that you shared together. You can think all of the little moments, all of the little intricacies of your relationship that other people now can experience that you're missing out on. That makes it difficult. You can think of times that you slept together. That makes it difficult to be friends. Now, this is especially difficult if you're trying to win them back because, in my mind, getting your ex back there's a lot that goes into it, but the two big concepts that you really need to understand is positioning and timing, right? Well, if you're friends with an ex, you're in a position of weakness. It's just the way it is. They're looking at you as a friend. You are friend zoned. It's harder to get out of the friend zone than it is to not be friends with them and get them back. And here, I'll give you proof. You've all heard those stories online about people who went from friends to lovers. And sometimes you'll hear these stories and it takes years and years of one person wearing the other person down, right? And maybe they end up being happily ever after. But by friend zoning yourself, you're essentially putting yourself in that scenario where you're friends and you have to work to be lovers, right? And sometimes it could take years. So in my mind, friend zoning yourself just adds more time onto the overall success of this process. Now, the one thing I will leave before we move on and start talking about the real question you're wanting to know is the one circumstance in which it's a good idea to friend zone yourself. The only time it's a good idea to purposefully friend zone yourself with your ex is if your ex has already moved on to someone else. Right? This is the whole idea of the being there method. I've done a lot of discussions and talks about the being there method and its importance throughout this process. Right? The idea is by simply being friends, you're not doing anything wrong. You're not stepping over the line, but you're intimidating the other person that your ex is with. And sometimes that intimidation is enough to cause an implosion of that relationship. Now, let's move on to the actual thing you're wanting to know. What do you do if your ex wants to be friends, but you want something more? i.e., how can you get out of the friend zone? Now, there's two concepts I want to talk about here. The first thing is a graphic I put together here, and I call it the hierarchy of trust. Think about the conversations you have with different people. Each conversation you have with a person in your life is different than the next person in your life. For example, you're going to have a different conversation with a stranger that you're going to have with a work colleague. You're going to have a different conversation with a friend than you're going to have with a work colleague. You're going to have a different conversation with your family than you're going to have with your friends. Oftentimes, you're going to have a different conversation with your best friend that you will with your family. And then, of course, you have the coveted significant other. You're going to have the ultimate conversations with them, the most impactful, the most sometimes intimate conversations with your significant other that oftentimes you're not going to have with your best friend. What separates people in your mind? Well, in my mind, it's trust. When you trust someone, you're trusting that they're not going to hurt you, right? You're not going to trust a stranger enough to open up and talk to things about things that you're talking about with your significant other that you will talk about with a stranger. You're just not going to do that. Why? They haven't proven that they're trustworthy to receive that type of information. Work colleagues. What separates them from even friends? Well, work colleagues, you're just mostly going to do small talk with. You're not going to really open up most of the time and talk about some of the things that you talk about with your friends. But here's the interesting thing. Oftentimes, work colleagues can turn into your friends. Why? Because after you talk to them enough, you start to build up enough trust. So if you're wanting to learn how to get out of the friend zone, in my mind, it's all about rebuilding trust. Here's the biggest mistake people make when they're trying to get their exes back. They think that they can, when they actually start having conversations again with their ex, talk to their ex like a significant other. But your ex is no longer a significant other. At best, they're a friend. At best, they're a friend. You've broken up. Most of the time, you have to kind of start over from the stranger portion of things. But at best, they're a friend, right? And you have to earn yourself back. You have to earn your way back to having the level of conversations that you were having before. Now, people think they're immune to this, and it boggles my mind why they think that, because having an ex basically break up with you is the same thing as them saying, look, I don't want to be with you. They're making or doing something that gives you a clear indication they don't want to be with you. So do not treat them like a significant other, because they are not. At best, they're a friend, right? And you have to work your way up until they are a significant other again. So right now, if you're friend zoned, understand you have to build up enough trust to have the level of conversations that you were having with them when they were your significant other. But how? How do you do that? Well, I actually want to point you to this little ditty I put together for you. You see, using this idea of trust and building conversations up, the same thing applies to the actual conversations you're going to have, right? When you start off talking to someone for the first time, just consider for a moment the trajectory someone has to go through to go from someone you just meet on a bus to your husband or your wife. What has to happen? What kind of conversations occur throughout the way to make that happen? Well, oftentimes, if you meet a stranger on a bus, you start small talk with them. If you kind of small talk with them and you find them attractive, you exchange numbers. You exchange numbers, you start actually telling them stories over text message potentially, right? You open up and you start sharing opinions with them, right? Once that trust is built, you actually start working and maybe having conversation with them over the phone and getting to know each other a little bit more there. And maybe they tell you something that they've never told anyone before. You break virgin ground. Maybe you tell something to them that you've never told anyone before. The ultimate sign of trust. And when that happens, you start sharing your feelings for each other. When that happens, you start going on dates and sharing even more feelings and building up even more connection. And then finally, you become a committed couple. And the cycle just continues on and on and on again until you're married, right? Notice the progression, right? You start off small, but progressively open up. The same thing applies here to getting back together with your ex, or in this case, getting out of the friend zone. You're not going to start sharing your feelings with them out of the gate. You have to earn their trust back in order for them to be receptive towards what you're saying. So don't treat this whole situation like you're above just another stranger to them, because you're not. At best, you're a friend. So treat it and have conversations with them like a friend would at first, and slowly progress upwards. Slowly get them to open up or get them to trust you again. And you'll find it's a lot easier to start sharing your opinions, to break virgin ground, to start sharing your feelings with them if you do this. The number one killer of everyone's chances is they start off by sharing feelings. They do some sort of no contact rule, which we talk a lot about throughout this YouTube channel, throughout my website, www.exboyfriendrecovery.com, throughout my best-selling book, throughout my coaching sessions. They do a no contact rule. They get back in touch with their ex. They start sharing feelings. No. You should start telling stories, then move up to sharing opinions, then move up to trying to get them to say something like, hey, I've never told anyone that before. Saying something to you on that level builds an extreme amount of trust. Only then should you begin sharing feelings with them. Now, does the trajectory always work out this perfectly? No. Sometimes you go straight from small talk to virgin ground. Sometimes you go straight from telling stories to sharing of feelings. The trajectory for everyone is different. But the one thing that is consistent through everyone's situation is this idea of working up towards getting back together, working up towards sharing feelings. So if you want to get out of the friend zone, that is the best way. There is no magic bullet. There is no fast phrase or trick I can give you to get you out of the friend zone tomorrow. There's only hard work. And oftentimes people aren't willing to put in the hard work. But if you want to have a successful sort of climb out of the friend zone, this is how you do it. And now it's immortalized for you in video on YouTube.